Good morning and welcome. It is Friday morning, the last day of a very consequential annual meeting of the World Economic Forum in 2026. I'm Azeem Azhar. I'm the founder of Exponential View. We help investors make sense of the AI economy, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be moderating this session on how high can unicorns fly. Another way to think about this is, do you know what's cool? $1 billion. Well, that is what used to be cool many years ago, and perhaps it's still cool and important today in the innovation economy for startups and for investors looking at disruptive and breakthrough companies. Now, to explore this question, I'm really delighted that we have this expert panel with us, starting with Rob Heyvaert, who is the founder and managing partner of Motive Partners in the US. Rob has built 2 unicorns himself. He invests in unicorns today, and I'm eager to hear his views. Next to him is Christina Kosmowski, the Chief Executive Officer of Logic Monitor in the US, and she has a great deal of experience of seeing companies go from a pre-unicorn state to a unicorn state. Next to her, Matthew Fitzpatrick, the CEO of Invisible Technologies, working in the AI observability domain. And finally, Nacho, the CEO of Bears Dev, a unicorn who didn't seek external capital. 4 experts, 4 remarkable perspectives. I think it's important to think about where this word unicorn came from. It emerged out of Silicon Valley a little more than 12, 13 years ago as a way of identifying companies that had broken through, that had in some sense found a path to scale and potentially a path to profitability. But for many of us in the sector, sometimes it felt like it was a status that entrepreneurs were chasing, a badge of honor that might not necessarily lead to sustainable businesses. We can think of many such cases that I'm sure we'll discuss. The question is, what does it mean today? Is it a useful sentiment? Does it tell us anything about the sustainability of those businesses? So let's perhaps start with you, Rob. What does that $1 billion valuation actually signal today?
I mean, if they do their homework well, and when we say $1 billion valuation, we have to be careful that we don't potentially use structured instruments to get there. So, but if it's a plain, clean $1 billion valuation, it means you get a business plan. It means you have a team that has a track record potentially, but more importantly, there's a belief in the future. And I hate to say it, but even $1 billion, $10 billion, $5 billion, it's all about future DCF. And the investor's discipline is on the one hand. On the other hand, in my humble opinion, what's more important is we need to continue to have abundance of capital going into the entrepreneur circles. And it needs to be at a scale and at a respect where they can really disrupt themselves. And I think a high valuation, lots of access to capital, potentially gives you a chance to disrupt an industry versus saying, oh, you're not relevant, who are you, can you even survive? No, I've got these 4 backers, my last valuation was $3.5 billion. So that, I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, the credibility that may come with that. Christina, what does it signal to you, the $1 billion valuation?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, I try not to get too caught up in the valuations, and especially keeping your employees focused on what matters and what you can control. But with that said, your customers, we have very big, large enterprise customers. And so when they invest in Logic Monitor, they want to ensure that you're going to be around for a long time. And so it gives you that credibility with your customers and that validation.
Matthew, what's your experience been?
So let me put some numbers behind this. In 2013, there were 40 unicorns in the world. Today, there are 1,600. So a 40x increase over basically a decade. Now, the question is, what is driving that? Now, I'll give 3 different reasons, I think, for it. One, scaling laws are different in the AI era. Like, I think if you look at the fact 50% of the total capital is going to AI, the recent class of Y Combinator is double the revenue base of any class before it. And so the rate at which revenue can scale here is different. The second issue I would say is power law dynamics. So a couple stats on that. If you look at the top decile of seed-funded startups are 7x more likely to become a unicorn than the bottom decile. And then of the remainder, as you get to the growth stage, 30% of total capital is going to 5 companies, and 70% of capital is going to 100 companies. So you have an extreme power law dynamic paired with scaling laws. And I think what that is leading to, and this is the long-winded answer to your question, is that people are pulling up are moving forward the valuation. So basically the time to unicorns 10 years ago, the average time to unicorn was 3.5 years. Today, it's 8 years. Today it's 3.5 years. And so effectively what's happening in the DCF math is because of that power law dynamic and because of those scaling laws, people are saying, and I guess you could say in some ways unicorns mean less as a result of that, but people are pulling forward valuations because of capital scarcity and power law dynamics. And there is a large amount of capital trying to funnel into a small number of companies. And I do think what that has led to is the definition of a unicorn has changed in this era.
There's a really interesting sub-thought in there about how risk has shifted if you're getting $1 billion valuation from the get-go, which we'll return to in a second. I'd just love to hear from Nacho your perspective on what that $1 billion signals.
Well, first of all, I'd like to have your voice, Matt, and your confidence and data. But I have one thing that I believe $1 billion mean, which is customer validation. They trust you. You've created something that actually creates value for customers. To me, when we reached that valuation years ago, the first thing that came to mind, because it's just a number, really, it's just a number. But at the end of the day, it basically means that you're creating value. You don't get to that number without having created real value for your customers. And I think that clear validation is really what, in a way, brings me joy. Other than that, it's just a number.
You got to your $1 billion valuation essentially through bootstrapping. So when you say $1 billion was validation by customers, and if that's always the case, a company that raises money at a $10 billion valuation on 2 sheets of a Google Doc has got validation from someone, but in that case, are the customers the venture capitalists who've met that valuation?
I think founders many times confuse fundraising with progress, and fundraising gives you, dopamine, right? But real progress gives you customers. Right? You may start thinking that just because you've raised money, you're actually creating money, and there is a correlation, but it's not always the case, right? You've seen, you're in the investment world. I am my side job is being an investor with about 80 portfolio companies today, and reality is that many of those companies will not get anywhere, right? But if you're building something your customers want, you're solving a problem, you're creating value for them, chances are you're going to be around, and then raising money may be a misleading metric, perhaps, and you're going to get a lot of dopamine, but that doesn't mean you're actually creating value.
I love that. I've written it down. It has to go out on social. Fundraising gives you dopamine. Customers give you value.
Do it with Spanglish, please. Okay.
Oh well, a little bit of Spanish. So Rob, I want to come into you.
So what I would say is, over the years I've learned is don't give a founder too much money. And there's one to have a valuation, but I've seen, and by the way, those who remember the dot-com crisis, there were tons of money. Somebody with an idea could raise $200 million, and he's spending on the wrong thing. So the combination of disciplined capital, have abundance of it, but then be very disciplined in how you deploy it is extremely important.
Right.
Extremely important.
So that is, and I think that's one of the things that we might observe as being tough in today's AI environment. I mean, I've seen any number, probably more than a dozen term sheets come my way where it's a $1 billion valuation and there's not a customer, sometimes not a product yet to show. Matthew, I was so interested in what you said about that dynamic playing out. So it feels like more risk is being taken at earlier stage, not merely because the valuation is higher, but to Rob's point, the amount of money that's coming in can lead to a psychological indiscipline on the part of the founding team.
So I think it depends on the business model within AI. And what I'd say is, to Rob's point on capital, I think there's one area of AI, particularly foundation model training, so LLM builders, where the bet people are making is that 90% of the capital used there is going to go to compute cost. Right? So the way to think about it, if they're betting $1 billion up front, is they're betting on a team and the use of kind of all the available tooling and then spend on compute to build something. So it's a different bet than, say, an enterprise business, which, we're an applied AI enterprise company. And in our case, we don't spend a ton on compute. So there's still, though, I do think in the AI era, a need to raise capital. I think if you're in an environment where there's this much competition and this much activity, the challenge of the growth versus harvest stage is you can raise less and bootstrap. And by the way, I mean, many amazing businesses have been built that way. but there's also the idea that you want to scale faster and build moats. And so I think it's almost two different dynamics. I think in the LLM model building world, you need the capital to just spend on compute. In the enterprise, you're doing it to build products and moats, and in a competitive landscape. And so I do think that's the kind of the flip side of the current landscape is if everyone else is raising money, you do have to think about the degree to which you raise comparables.
Yeah.
The only thing you have to be careful, because when you say $1 billion, most of the terms that go out of the billion have structure.
That's right.
So what does it actually mean at the end of the day? Because the money's going to come out first from the money that came in. So I think we have to kind of also be careful. I think it's not all about, to your point, it's just the valuation.
And Christina, I'm eager to, your career involved a couple of companies that grew really fast, famously for their customer revenue and their customer retention, right? Yeah. Salesforce and then Slack. So what are the lessons that you've learned there that are perhaps when you look at the market today, you think these have been unlearned?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I say you don't really know until the renewal cycle comes up. And so I look at a lot of these, early unicorns. I'm like, glad they had a renewal, because that's when the true value gets tested. And so I think that's really important. And you've got to stay focused on, do you have product market fit? And I agree with you that, yes, you want to grow fast and acquire customers. But again, if you're just spending so much, it's really hard to tell if you have this true product market fit. And that's what, I know it always keeps me up at night at Logic Wonder. I'm like, do we have market fit? Is the macro conditions just, fueling? So like, what is it? What is actually the value proposition here? And so I think that's
Can I just ask you to unpick that for me slightly there? So you said that, have you really got true product market fit? Well, in the old days, if you had growing ARR, annualized recurring revenue, you had a good retention, your customer acquisition costs were not so bad, that was a sign of a sustainable business. What are the metrics? Are you suggesting that those metrics perhaps aren't enough right now in this frothy market?
Yeah, I mean, I think they still are. I think we haven't seen this customer acquisition being cheap, right? Or efficient. I think people are doing whatever it takes to go get customer acquisition. And then again, we haven't seen the renewal or retention rates. And then in this market, especially anything that's AI, people are throwing money at it because they're being asked to experiment without actually understanding what they're trying to achieve.
Matthew, please, yeah.
No, look, I actually think it's a great point. I think that in the current market, acquisition of revenue is overrated. I do think it is easier now to acquire a lot of revenue and then not be able to deliver it. I think that is one of the challenges what some people have called vibe revenue. I actually think the biggest markers, if you think of a valuation long term, DCF is determined by how fast you scale the revenue and the persistence of that revenue. And so in my mind, actually, I completely agree with you. The true markers of success are retention, customer happiness and retention. If you have happy customers that are sustained for a long time, that is how you build a real business. And I do think gross margin is the other one. I think there are a ton of wrapper companies right now that are negative margin and going to be perpetually negative margin because they're just using compute as a way to deliver what they have. And so I do think those are the two things. The sustainable businesses will have real gross margin and retention.
Let's peel those two apart. We'll come to gross margins in a second. I want to come to the sustainable bit of the question. If you're looking at metrics that are based on DCF or retention, that is a metric that develops very, very slowly over time. And yet decisions are having to be made more quickly because of the competition. So there's a paradox, or there's a compromise that needs to be made there. You're having to deploy capital at this moment. So how do you?
Yeah, it's funny. It is all DCF, but you make it up because it's a piece of paper. You have no clue what's going to happen. So I think it's more about the people and the markets and the ability to imagine what could be possible if those people attack that market with the same passion that an entrepreneur does and have this unique angle. And then it's still a lot of his intuition, in my humble opinion. And then, of course, you build from there. Pivoting is also a big thing. I've seen so many company pivot, and I think that's so important. So it's all about that ability to be super agile, in my opinion, because DCF is discounted for a reason. Eh?
Now, Nacho, you've built your business bootstrapped. You do have AI in your name, though, so I think that was very prescient of you when you.
Not planned, by the way.
It's intuition. So just think about what you see in the portfolios that you're investing in personally, and How do you bridge the fact that you've built a business in a, what we might say, a traditional way through customer revenue?
So interestingly, I feel like there's a significant difference in the way you build a business when you're fully bootstrapped versus when you've raised money in a way. Fundamentally, you see a difference where, well, first of all, you're freaking out about making payroll every day. That's obviously one clear difference. But when you think about it, I think many times VC-backed leaders are lean towards moving really fast, even if the unit economics just don't work. You don't have a business that works, right? But you have
Could you
to
just
move.
Explain unit economics if people are unfamiliar
things
with
like,
the idea?
we talked about gross margins. We talked about customer acquisition cost, right? Those type of things, when you have no money, which is our case when BearsDev started, 17 years ago, we had barely no money, zero. And so in a way, if it doesn't work for the customer and the customer's not seeing value, I'm not going to pursue it because I can't, right? And fundamentally, when you have money in your bank, you're in a situation where you may lean towards, I'm going to bring revenue by spending more money than the revenue that will come in, right? And that's something that it's very hard not to do because the pressure to do that many times, there are obviously very smart investors who may not give you that pressure, put that pressure on you. But oftentimes founders fall into that trap of just having a business that doesn't really work instead of pivoting and finding a way to bring real value so that they can actually have economics that work well for their business long term. That's something that it's very easy to avoid when you have no money.
Yeah, it reminds me of something one of my mentors told me. He said, I've seen many more startups die of indigestion than starvation, because the starvation puts discipline in you. I said we'd come back to this question about margins, which I think is so important in this world of very, very fast-growing AI companies. And I was reflecting on the fact that about a year and a half ago, the measure was AI companies are getting to $10 million of annualized recurring revenue 3 times faster than similar SaaS companies a few years ago. But the charts now show getting to $200 million in annualized recurring revenue, not 10, because nobody's interested, seemingly, in that 10. But whether that economics is sustainable is a different question. And Matthew, you raised this point about gross margins. So how do AI economics, margins, compute costs, data expenses, talent expenses, differ from traditional software or software as a service businesses? Do you want to jump in? I'll come to Christina.
Yeah, sure. I think I'd call out a couple differences. So the theory of software is that you build it once, you never have to touch it, and it should run at 95% margins forever. Now, the reality of software is that's never how it's actually been. If you look at all the public, and Rob knows as well, if you look at all the public software multiples or companies, they all have tons of services, they all have tons of forked code. And one interesting fact during this era is SaaS multiples have in the public markets gone from 20x to 10x in the last 3 years because they've tried to become profitable. Software actually struggles to get profitable. But the theory of it is it should be 95% margin forever. AI is not that. I think there are a couple big differences with AI. One, more consumption-based, unit-based revenue rather than pure platform fees. So like our revenue is a mix of platform fees and consumption, but you're going to have more outcomes that are tied to usage or outcomes. Revenue is not just going to be tied to platform fees in the AI era. It's just not a feasible, it's not a logical way to structure a lot of deals. 2, you do have more ongoing costs tied to compute. So there's huge variation in that. There are some companies, like many of the coding apps, that have very large amounts of compute for their revenue. Most of the applied enterprise companies are using more inference-based, so compute is kind of single-digit percentages of their revenue, but that is an ongoing cost. And then AI does have more configuration and forward deployed engineering around it too. And we're very open about this. We do all our own configuration and forward deployed engineering because you can't just sell a box and say, this is my AI box, take it. You have to configure it and make it customized to the individual company. And customer, and I think that's been the big change in this era is people are realizing this is no longer about I invest 100 into a box and then I in theory scale that box forever, which really didn't actually ever work as a model. And it is more about customization.
I just want to help you to help me clarify a couple of points. We'll come to Christina and then Rob. But you said just explain the forward deployed engineer, why that is, what that is, why that's relevant, and why people have got so excited about it in the last year or so.
Yeah, so I think as many people in the room know, traditional software, the way you would do it is you'd have a box, like say you're in InsurTech, and the piece of insurance technology would do one thing. What you'd have is like an Accenture or a Cognizant would come in, and they would do all the data linkages to map to the schema and stand up your box. You can't really do that in AI because usually the workflow, if you take something, I'll take insurance, like claims processing, very specific to the institution. You're generating something that's not just numbers. It may be like a 20-page document or a 30-page document. It requires training, reinforced learning, validation, and a lot of workflow customization. And so what forward deployed engineering involves, and Palantir was kind of a company that really started this many years ago, is embedding engineers alongside the customer in the early days of configuration. So when we do a deployment, we actually start by putting 3 to 4 engineers usually, or 2 to 4 engineers on site at the client premise. So physically in person, sitting next to them embedded, and stand up the application there. And then it becomes software over time, but it does start with configuration.
I mean, back in the late 90s when I was in enterprise software, we used to have that, but you'd go with the CD-ROM to the clients and to install.
And the one thing I would have is different about like the evolution of that is you can't rely on a services vendor to do that work for you. I do think that's one of the differences. If you say my business model relies on Accenture or Cognizant to scale, you're going to be waiting a long time. And so I think the reason AI has had much more forward deployed engineering is you need to control your own customer relationship to get it stood up.
But there's one more clarification I need from you, just a brief one, because you said something that I think surprised me, and it may surprise other people. You said there's lots of forked code in there. What do you mean by forked code in a SaaS business, and why would we be surprised?
Well, so every time, like the theory again would be, and Rob, you probably know more about this than anyone, you build a piece of software that is supposed to work one way. But then you talk to a customer and they're like, I need this feature, I need this feature, I need this additional feature, I need this workflow to look this way. And so what people used to do is write all these really complex stored procedures. And what that's led to in SaaS over the last 20 years is 50 different versions of every different deployment that when you try and do like each incremental version annually, you can't really push that through cleanly because they're different pieces of software. And so I think in many ways the big lie of software over the last 20 years is it's not a single monoline tool. It ends up becoming 50 very custom tools, which require a lot of support, customization, and are really, really hard to update every year, which is why you have so much legacy. 70% of the software in the world is over 20 years old, right, and most of it is terrible.
Sounds like a great market opportunity, that 70%. Just quickly to Christina, if I may, and I'll come to you, Rob.
Yeah. So I sort of disagree a little bit because the forward deployed engineers, you as a software company are putting, that's why the margins are bad. And are they ever going to get better? I don't know that they are, because you're training your customer that you're taking on all the risk versus in the software, you're saying if you want to customize and go be a special snowflake, that's fine, but you go do it with an external consultant. And so the risk then shifts to the customer. And I think there's a lot of value in saying, forcing the customer to think, what are the best practices here versus allowing them to create this special snowflake software exactly for them.
I'm going to just bring Rob in here as well on this point, so that we don't dive too deeply into software business models. Just on hearing that discussion, there does feel like there's a different underlying economics in AI-based companies with what all the attention is. What do you see as an investor?
For sure. And if anything, I think traditional SaaS companies, I think, are in trouble. That model in my long term. And why? Because if you think what AI can do for you is it's the whole flow of complex workflows, and it's potentially reinventing your whole enterprise. And that's a whole set of other economics where it might be outcome driven. So we don't know. We're experimenting with companies trying to do better pricing around that, but it's not actually there yet. But I think the economics could become far more interesting for the winners. And I think the traditional multi-billion-dollar SaaS companies are struggling, and I don't know if they can transform as easily as they say. That they have everybody locked in because it's all legacy, but what happens if you say, okay, no, I'm thinking a decade. I'm not thinking 3 days or 3 years. I'm thinking a decade. And what does a bank look like in a decade from now? And that is, you can't make it up, but it's interesting. I think that the economics are going to become super interesting and there's going to be less pressure on margin, but more pressure on actual value creation on the workflow and the execution of a capability. We're going to decompose whole industries and recompose them again, and they're going to be winners, and they're going to be the unicorns that help create that as a result of that.
Fantastic. What we'll do, I want to just change tack a little bit to talk about the leadership dynamic of this question, and how do your roles as leaders change as the companies grow, and is this mythical valuation? Maybe it's the unicorn, maybe it's I think we've heard of decacorns now, and is there a gigacorn emerging? Maybe somewhere. There must be. But Christina, I'm really interested in whether there's a transition point that a company goes through as it grows, perhaps as it passes certain revenue milestones or valuation milestones, and what that means for the founder in terms of trying to run that business and keeping the team on side.
Yeah, I mean, it's significant, right? Because you can no longer go in and do everything. So you've got to figure out what's most important at this stage that we're at, that I need to spend my time on. And so at the beginning of every year, I'd say, all right, this year is strategic partnerships. So I've talked a lot about, at this moment in time, the ecosystem is so critical. And so that's something that I uniquely can do. But delivering all the customer outcomes and all the processes, I need to allow my leaders to kind of go there. And so being really clear around what are you going to focus on, where do you need these repeatable processes, and where are you going to push your leaders on it.
Is there a moment where this becomes noise, the external attention that a company startup might have if it's seen as being high-flying, Salesforce, Slack, your new company?
I think, even when I was at those companies, that Mark and Stuart were very clear, like, that is noise. Like, that's not what we're focused on. And I think the macroeconomic valuation multiples and all that changes and comes and goes. So you have to understand what is most important to our business. Are we staying focused on delivering the value to our customers? And are we making our bets in a controlled manner? I will say, as you get larger, you can say when you make a bet, to unwind a bet becomes harder. So when you're smaller, you can pivot easier. But when we're 400 million in revenue right now, and if I'm making a bet, it could take me 12 months to unwind the skill set of the engineers and things that I'm building. And so I have to be much more controlled about what we're doing there.
Well, and congratulations on $400 million in revenue. That's a nice number. Nacho, you will have faced different pressures as your company grew. Let's just start with this one, which is, at what point did your business stop being about? Did you start to have confidence that the business was actually working, rather than a sort of expensive quest you'd put yourself on?
You're not going to like this answer. I think that will never ever happen, at least to me. I think it's a bit of a mistake. Paranoia for founders is a great thing. I often say that we're basically paid to describe the future. As leaders, we're paid to describe the future, and hopefully we're going to be right more times than wrong. But another thing that I believe every founder or leader should do is be really paranoid and operate like if you're going to go bankrupt tomorrow, right? Now that said, I think there was a time, fundamentally, I would normally go to the doctor before making payroll and say, if I get a heart attack, please bring me back to life, right? One day I was like, oh, it's just a calendar reminder. We're good. So that's one thing. Call it financial success, right? That there's a moment in time where you basically don't worry about making payroll. I think that moment, you're good. As a bootstrap company, that moment, you're good. It's life-changing. You come from scarcity to, okay, how do we become a decacorn or gigacorn? And then perhaps there's a more subjective metric, which in our case was seeing that all the software we were building for our clients was really out there, right? Hey, check your phone. Oh, that's a cool app. I've done that. Oh, look at your computer. Oh, we did that, right? That's perhaps more of a understanding that you're having an impact, real impact in the market. Consumers are getting better products because of you. That was perhaps the moment I felt like, okay, we're really doing something here.
But you're part of an ecosystem where you'll know many venture-backed founders. you built that scale without any valuation pressure. Do you think that venture-backed founders are being systematically misled when they're trying to build their companies?
There's a number of things where I think your customers will punish you for your mistakes way faster than your investors, right? And no offense, I'm an investor myself. There's this joke, hey, Mom, how did we become so rich? By Dad charging 2 and 20 to underperform the S&P 500, right? Right? And I'm terrible at jokes, but what I'm saying is, in a way, they have multiple bets. Your clients have only one bet. If you don't build exactly what they need and they don't make money out of what you help them build, they're going to punish you. They're going to punish you very, very quickly. Whereas investors won't necessarily punish you as much, right? And then there's, we talked about this dopamine, right? But I think there's also this pressure for speed that doesn't necessarily always lead you to the right place. Yes, sure, going fast is great, but doing it in a way where it's sustainable, it's even more important in my view.
But I think the investors' attitude is also changing, and the role is evolving from spray and pray to really saying, okay, can I help you? Can I be impactful on your client acquisition, talent, and so on, but genuinely, not as a tagline to get my money and then structure you all the way to. And that's why I think, by the way, venture capital is not a great capital allocation strategy. It's not, if you look at it, if you put it into, there's too much risk and so on. So I think we're going to a world where I think the transformation I talked about in total industries, you're going to see pools of capital come in at every level, and you are going to have a choice and say, okay, I don't want that, I don't want the structure, and these are the 4 people I want to work with. And if you work with those 4 people, the chances of you being successful is much higher.
Mm-hmm. Matthew, can I just ask you from the leadership side, unpicking this tension that keeps emerging between the discipline that not having capital provides you, the discipline that customers who need this one thing that works for them provides you, against the opportunity to go quickly, the opportunity to have a strong balance sheet that gives you some strategic alternatives. But then we heard from Christina that you get to a stage where the balance sheet is not the thing that constrains your ability to pivot. Sitting within that, what are the types of decisions that you are trying to make, and which are the ones do you find particularly difficult to do well?
Yeah, so I have an interesting perspective on this because before leading Invisible, I led McKinsey's internal tech development group for a decade. So we were building tons of different applications for many different clients, but off of OpEx, so off of the P&L effectively. And I do think the way you build is very different when you're doing that. And I've been through many of what you're describing, which is you are constantly thinking about within a year, how do I think about the spend within a year and how it will pay back within a year. So I think the liberating part about having capital is it gives you the ability to make long-term 2, 3, 4-year bet. Often in AI, that may be a 6 to 12-month bet because of the pace it moves, but to invest capital in things. I will say that I think the concept of valuation, to kind of what Rob is saying, is a little bit overrated because it's a point-in-time moment. It's not an actual realization of any kind. Meaning, if you build something that's worth a lot and it goes to 0, that accomplishes nothing. And so I think our North Star has not really been to think about valuation at all, really, on the journey. We're thinking about building something that 5, 10 years from now, we want lots of recurring revenue, customers that are very happy, a really good team. I spend a ton of my time thinking about recruiting. So like one kind of controversial take I would have is that capital allocation is less important than recruiting elite people, particularly in the AI world. If you can recruit the best engineers, they will find the things to build. And I do spend probably capital allocation is number 2, but I would take recruiting over capital allocation right now.
And the thing about this is, the lower the valuation, the more attractive it is to attract talent.
By the way,
it's not the other way around.
It's actually a really good point. And so in many ways, like being obsessed with incremental milestones on the journey is the exact wrong way to do it. Rob's exactly right. You can actually get much more talent in if your valuation is lower. And so I think if you keep the North Star of where are we going to be in 5 years, where are we going to be in 10 years, and your organizations think that way, you're fine. And you have to find investors that think like that. There are a ton of investors that will come in and say, I'll give you some big number, but like, there's a very famous one who makes you triple your projections every time you take their money. Everyone knows who that is. But like that, you're making a bet. You know exactly what you're doing. You're going to have to triple all your revenue projections and try and hyperscale, and you'll probably erode the core of the business. So our view is long-term, sustainable enterprise value, recurring revenue, happy customers. That is the North Star. And everything in between doesn't matter.
That is why, as Nacho said, leaders are paid to describe the future. We have time perhaps for some questions as well. I'm happy to continue discussing with the panelists, but if anybody would like to, in a few minutes, I'll come to the floor and you can put your hand up and the mic will come to you. While the group considers whether they want to intervene, let's just pick up on this particular theme. And we've talked about leadership now. I'd like to just come back to the AI wave of the moment, because it does feel to me that it is so significant in everyone's decision making, and the shape of companies seems to be changing. Every generation, the number of people you need to deliver revenue diminishes. General Motors needed more employees than Microsoft. Microsoft needed more employees than Facebook. Facebook needed more employees than Instagram when it was an independent company. Instagram needed more employees than WhatsApp when it was an independent company. And that is, I guess, the theory of automation being writ large. In Silicon Valley, there is a discussion about the one-person unicorn. Is the one-person unicorn plausible? Rob, why don't you start?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, again, what does it mean? We just talked 20 minutes about the unicorn issue. If somebody has an amazing moat and uses all the infrastructure, but because people are investing gazillions of dollars, and if you can be a smart entrepreneur sitting on top of that and using the right connectivity, you could have this amazing idea with 4 people in a garage. By the way, some of the best software is written in 2-3 weeks and 2-3 months, not in 10 years.
Yeah. So, and I'll tighten the definition by unicorn. Let's assume it's not a fantasy structured valuation, but it is underpinned by, 9 figures of revenue for sake of argument. Christina, do you think that one-person unicorn is possible?
Well, I think it depends, right? I mean, I think it's not possible in enterprise software, so we won't see it there. In some consumer software, yeah, it is plausible, but one of the things we've been talking about this week is this concept of is the technology you're building for people bringing joy, like is it improving human experiences? And so I just wonder, whatever product you're delivering, if you're not having some human that's helping ensure that you're actually making another human's life more enjoyable or higher quality versus just doing something, if you can get that effect.
Okay, so not in enterprise, maybe if you can make someone's life better, but just briefly, because we'll go to questions straight after that.
I would say potentially in consumer, absolutely not in enterprise. And I mean, look, you look at the stats right now, 5% of models in enterprise make it to production right now. So you actually have a huge adoption problem or capability problem in enterprise. And the only way to solve that is really good sellers or people who know sector experts, forward deployed engineering, good product leaders. That is all, we're a very human-centric company. I think humans are going to be more and more important to get enterprise AI working. So again, maybe in consumer, but absolutely not in enterprise. I think these teams will look actually maybe even bigger than some of the traditional early teams in SaaS.
Nacho, what do you think?
I hope so. I hope so for a simple reason. We're a U.S. company. We're conceived in Latin America, where access to capital is still a challenge, right? And this is true we live in a bubble. Almost everyone in our crowd, no offense, we all live in a bit of a bubble. We're in, this is the most relevant conference in the world, probably. The fact that we're here means that, our reality is significantly better than the large majority of the population, right? And I think AI brings something that I wish we had when we started, which is the possibility of actually building something impactful, whether you get to a unicorn valuation or whether you don't, doesn't really matter. But you can build things that were unthinkable years ago. And one person can have a real impact without capital. That for humanity should be absolutely phenomenal, where we're going to benefit from all the brilliant people around the world that don't have the means today. Now they do. All of a sudden, they have a power they didn't exist before. So I hope so. I really hope so.
Wonderful. I'm going to go to the floor, Rob. We'll get just come back. There's a lady at the front who'd like to ask a question. If you could just briefly state your name and ask a single question, that would be wonderful.
Yes. I'm Rebecca Boudreaux, CEO of Oberon Fuels, and the valuation is a number, as you've discussed. But the value of a company is defined by the people who help build a company. What are some thoughts on the team that you build over the life cycle of creating and building your unicorn?
Yeah, who would like to take that first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting is
On to you.
I really believe, and we have portfolio companies where the founder has 90%, and we have portfolio companies where the capital was distributed or the shares very early on. I'm personally a very big believer of sharing broader, in the broader context, and be smart about it, because you have to reinvent your management team 3 times to get to the 400 or 5 times. But I'm a big fan of sharing, and for me it's a red flag if the founder sits on his shares and actually says prove it first. I think trust is something you give in the beginning and not at the end when it comes to transformation.
I'm going to ask Nacho just briefly, because you didn't take the external capital, you probably didn't have to negotiate with a founder to say what's our ESOP percentage at this round. How have you approached this question?
So to me, you know, I'm in the people business, right? And we hire brilliant people for a living, right? So obviously, I'm a little bit biased towards what does hiring the right people mean? Well, for us, it means everything, really. But if I wasn't running BearsDev and I was running any other company, I would still say that our job as leaders is to find the best people to join you. If you're not spending as a leader at the minimum 10 hours a week interviewing yourself, you should reconsider your position. I think you should not be leading a company. There's nothing more important than having brilliant people. Why? Because your model will change. The world changes, right? How do you solve for that? By having brilliant, hardworking people around you. And I think that's really, genuinely what matters the most for any company in the world.
Thank you. Matthew, very briefly, because I want to get the other question from the other.
I think simply with both capital and people tend to, sometimes I think founders will overemphasize dilution. So like giving away a portion of a company, when I think you should think about it as being multiplicative. So if you take capital and spend it well, you will grow, the value of the company grows in aggregate. I think people are an even more extreme example of that. I go back to the idea, the #1 differentiator in AI right now is recruiting. So if you can recruit great talent, you should pay that great talent well, because it will grow the aggregate value of the company materially. So people who are hoarding share values and trying to keep it all for themselves will not be successful in AI. The #1 thing, and our employee base owns about 60% of the company right now, because we were bootstrapped for a long time. It is the most important thing to getting a really dedicated and amazing team is making sure that equity is broadly distributed.
Brilliant. Thank you. There's another question up at the front. Gentleman here, if you just state your name and ask one clear question.
I'm Kikong, a university professor of Nankai University, China. I just want to know what's the role of technology in this context of unicorn development? You mentioned a lot about talents, customers, and so on and so forth. What is the role of technology itself?
Christina, do you want to go?
I'll jump in. My investor talks a lot about the rule, like we're moving from rule of 40 to rule of 70. And so I completely agree that we're talking about, the external, we're selling an AI product, but we have to use these products ourselves so that we can scale faster and not just even more efficiently, but go get customers that we could never get. We've got some major, multi-billion-dollar revenue competitors, and it was impossible a year ago to be able to go catch them. And now I'm like, we can catch them, because now we can generate pipeline faster than we've ever been able to generate that. And there's limitless possibilities. And so it's very exciting, but I'm relying on my partners, my technology partners, to help me do that.
I'll come to you as well.
Yeah, I think if you think about scaling laws, so like when SAP was built in Germany in the 80s, they literally had to go to a factory and on a mainframe build an initial system. It took them 2 years. So technology was very painful back then. Now you can spin up a cloud instance, spin up an LLM, you can use the coding tools. And so your ability to build, the velocity of that building is 30, 40, 50x what it was 20, 30 years ago. And I do think that's why scaling laws have changed. So a lot of what you're thinking about as a CEO is how do I allocate my capital across the different products I'm building? But the rate of, particularly if you're using the coding tools, which are, if you have great engineers and coding tools, you are a 10, 20, 30x faster builder than any traditional software team. So I think that's why I'm emphasizing recruiting so much is if you find the right people, the velocity you get from those people is infinite in the current technology environment. And that is the function of the tools available now.
Rob, I'm going to come to you for the last word. We have just under 35 seconds.
I'll be very brief. I think it changes our industry completely. If you look at what my guys are working on, is really, we do judgment. We sit in a long meeting called investment committee, and we have all these memos, and we have Bain, we have everybody, we have McKinsey, and then we make a judgment call. I think that's changing. We are trying to see if there is such a thing where we can create an infrastructure where the machine makes the decision for us. And we've been experimenting. It's phenomenal. It's early days, but I can imagine fast forward 5 to 10 years from now, that commoditization of insightful investing is coming. People don't like it, so it came up with the 2 and 20. Who said that? But I think it should stay a while, 2 and 20, if you don't mind.
Always a bit longer. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. This has been an absolutely incredible discussion, and I'm so sorry that we have run out of time. I simply cannot sum up the points that have been raised today. There is so much insight in here. I'm going to encourage you all to go back and watch the recording when the forum makes it available. Leaders, we learnt, are paid to describe the future. I want to thank our 4 leaders on the panel today who have described very, very compelling perspectives on the next coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much.